Hi class, and welcome to chapter 36 on population ecology, and this is video 1. So just a little introduction on population ecology. It's basically concerned with changes in population size and factors that can regulate populations over time. So what an ecologist is going to do is it's going to look to population ecology to help explain the biodiversity of an environment, or the different species and amounts of species that's in this environment. Ecologists learn the structure and dynamics of these populations, and then they take this information and then they're able to develop sustainable food sources and assess the impact on human activities. So one example of what we're doing right now, ecologists are looking at polar bears and the way that they are in their environment and how many there are in the population, and then we can determine what impact humans are having. And we know that right now, in the case of polar bears, we have a huge impact. So, jumping into 36.1, what population ecologists do is they study individuals in a population and population sizes. So what a population is, this is just a brief reminder, it's a group of individuals of a single species that are interacting and occupy the same general area. So maybe the population of bunnies in your backyard, okay? So not all the bunnies in the whole United States, but just in one given area. So individuals in a population, they're going to rely on the same resources. They're going to be influenced by the same environmental factors because they're living in the same area. So anything that's going to affect one of them will most likely affect all of them. And these are population, this is the individuals that are likely to interact and breed with one another. So population can be described by the number and distribution of the individuals. So how many of these organisms are there? And how are they distributed? You know, are they all living in one area? Are they distributed pretty evenly? Also, it includes biotic and abiotic factors and the influences that these have on the environment. We talked a lot about abiotic and biotic factors, different ones, and what they can do to specific organisms. So this is basically the cause of variation in population sizes. So population, which is pretty general, it can increase through birth and immigration. So, you know, the more an organism's having children, you know, that's going to increase the population. And then organisms that come in from other areas, like the bunny from your neighbor's yard coming into your yard, that's immigration. And then death and immigration out of an area is going to do the reverse and decrease the population. So we have these idealized models that will predict the pattern of population growth. So we have two models that we're going to talk about. That's exponential growth model, and this has a J-shaped curve. So the population is going to increase, and the slope becomes steeper and steeper as that population increases. So you guys have probably talked about exponential growth graphs in math, maybe? So this is an example of that exponential. So we have just a small population size to begin with, and then it exponentially increases. Then we have the logistic growth model. So this takes into account limiting factors. Limiting factors are environmental factors that restrict population growth. That can be anything from abiotic factors to density-dependent factors, and we'll talk about both of those. Going back to exponential, this does not occur in nature. Eventually, populations will have to level off because we have those limiting factors, such as amount of food, weather conditions, killing off organisms, disease. So here's an example of logistic. So we start off with an exponential curve, however we level off, and eventually that growth will stop, and that's our logistic curve. So idealized models describe two kinds of population growth. We have our exponential growth, which is growing at a continuous rate, increasing at a continuous rate, and then we have our logistic growth, which eventually the population will stop growing, and death rates and birth rates will eventually even out. So here is the graph, two separate graphs superimposed on each other. So here's that here's that exponential growth curve, that blue, and then the logistic in red. So it's showing, you know, basically this is like never going to happen in a real population. Organisms will never continually increase and increase without stopping. And we're going to talk about what this dotted line is here in a second. So that population growth will slow in the logistic model and will eventually cease as that population density increases, because those factors will have a greater effect on the population when there's more of them. So disease will spread more rapidly when there's more organisms to catch the disease. Increasing population density will result in a decrease in birth rate and an increase in death rate. So abiotic factors can reduce the population also, even before those other limiting factors become important. This could be a result such as water, not enough food. Most populations fluctuate in numbers naturally in everyday life. So there's rise and falls of populations all the time. So then we have density-dependent factors. This will result in lower birth rates and higher death rates when there is a higher population density, thus the term density-dependent. So this results from a competition of resources. Alright, some populations fluctuate in density with regularity. These are called boom and bust cycles. So boom is increasing drastically and then bust is decreasing drastically. So this can be due to food shortages or predator-prey relationships. And one of the examples that your book talks about is the hare and the lynx. So what happens most likely is the hare will increase. What the lynx does is it overeats and it overextends the amount of prey it has. Well, when there's not enough hare, then the lynx start to die off. Well, when the lynx start to die off, then the hare can reproduce, and then there's more of them, and then the lynx eat them all, and vice versa, and it keeps going and going and going. So that accounts for those natural rise and falls, as you can see from the graph. Those natural rise and falls. That's boom, bust, boom, bust. So now we're going to talk a little bit about human population, and we'll touch on this a lot more in class than we do in the video. Basically, human population just continues to increase. However, the growth rate, the rate at which we are increasing is starting to slow down. Human population is expected to continue to increase for several decades. A lot of that has to do with the healthcare that we have now. We have better healthcare now than we ever have. We're finding ways to cure a lot of different diseases. It's prolonging the life of individuals, and then they can have more children. We also are finding ways to genetically engineer crops to make more food available for people. And with more food, with more resources, we can reproduce and we can live longer. So 95% of that increase is actually in developing nations. And part of the reason why this is that they don't have the knowledge about different forms of birth control that we do in developing countries. So because of this, because they don't have that technology available to them, they do have more children than in developing countries. So here is just a graph kind of showing the way humans have increased. And this is in your book, and I explain it a lot better in your book, and we'll definitely talk about it in class. So while we're still increasing, we're not increasing as fast as we were in the past years. Alright, so here's a little bit of a connection with humans and the way that we consume and the impact we're having on the environment. So an ecological footprint, what an ecological footprint is it's a measure of the resources and consumption of an individual or a state or a nation or as a world. So the U.S. Census Bureau projects that 8 billion people will be in the world by the next 20 years. And this book is not as up to date as 2012, and we are even closer to that. So they are on the right track. And then we'll have 9.5 billion by mid-21st century. So by 2050, we're going to increase a lot. So basically, an ecological footprint will help us understand resource availability and usage. So the amount of food that's available for humans, the amount of land that we need to build houses, to live, to grow food. The United States has the biggest ecological footprint in the world and the largest ecological deficit. As Americans, we're living well beyond our means. And it's kind of sad to see because most Americans, the way they live, we would need about 5 worlds, 5 Earths to sustain the way most Americans live. So just totally beyond our means. So this is where we're going to stop for the first video. I hope you all enjoyed.